I am a business person, hence the suit. But I'm very pleased to be here with so many esteemed fellow graduates on this panel. And I was just going to touch briefly on 4 points this morning. One is, how can someone with a liberal arts education become a business person and an entrepreneur? And Helen asked me to speak to that. And what has been its influence on my life and my career to this point. Second point is, how is it possible for one to pursue parallel paths of business and philanthropy in its broadest sense, which has been a hallmark of my last 30 years. And a few lessons learned in the course of building our business, and finally, how we might anticipate and react to sort of relentless change in the context of business and greater society. So in the first subject, for me, a liberal arts education, and I wasn't stealing from the principal's comments, but it meant to me gaining a general knowledge in a wide range of subjects, and in doing so, develops skills to better equip me to become a global citizen and to pursue success in business while contributing to the community. And before I came to this school, I was a student for 5 years at a Jesuit boys' school. And they instilled the same kinds of virtues, globalism and leadership. And so really when I came to Glendon, it was a continuation of my, in many ways, of my high school education. I've often thought about where I would have ended up if I had taken a different path. And many of my friends took the Queen's Commerce route or the Western Business Ivy School route. And before graduating, of course, they were heavily recruited by big blue chip corporations, and their lives were in many ways set for them by somebody else and by that experience. I, on the other hand, graduated with a liberal arts degree, political science, without a clear path. I wasn't recruited by anybody. And by the way, I wouldn't have got into Ivy Business School or Queen's Commerce, so that it's all academic, even talking about that. But I'm convinced that, in fact, having graduated from this environment is what resulted in me taking a more entrepreneurial path. And so instead of floating with the tide, I chose to swim for a goal, separate from and different from many of my friends. And it was at the age of 29, after 5 or 6 years of grounding in insurance companies in the United States and Canada, that I left and corporate world. And I struck a relationship with a kindred spirit, and we went out on our own. We borrowed $700,000, which was a lot of money back then. I had no money. I was making $35,000 a year. I had no money to invest in the business. And we bought this 99-year-old business that was in the same family for 3 generations and was suffering from benign neglect. We had 8 employees. We now have 11,000. But parallel to that journey in business, which I'll talk about a little bit, but I also began a parallel journey in what has now been 26 years of volunteering in progressively more senior volunteer positions with charities in the United States, in Canada, and in the UK, which has scope around the world. The highlight of which, one of the highlights of my life has been that in 2007, I succeeded His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, as chairman of the Worldwide Duke of Edinburgh's Award, which operates in 146 countries. And through that, I've had the opportunity to meet with heads of state and people in the diplomatic circles and business leaders and even some bad people in many parts of the world, all over Africa and Asia, Southeast Asia, and many, many different countries. So it really, although I'm not in government and I'm not in diplomacy and I'm not in the arts, my charitable involvement has brought me into all of those spheres over the years. And I think business and philanthropy do not need to be mutually exclusive. It's pretty common to see people who have had great success in business then becoming philanthropists afterwards, after they've had some kind of big liquidity event. But in my case, I wanted to give myself fully to both my business career and to my charitable pursuits from the outset in parallel, without either one of them really suffering. And of course, at the same time, I was married and we were raising a family. And so I had 3 really important things going on in my life all around the same time, all around the age of 30 when this all began. And I found out pretty early on, and maybe this came out of my Jesuit education and my further education here at Glendon, that I needed to find meaning and purpose in my life, and it couldn't be one-dimensional, just based on success in business. I'm very proud of the success we've had in business. It's been very fulfilling for me, but I'm even more proud that I've been able to pursue other interests outside of just my business career. And I can say with the benefit of hindsight that my experiences in business have been very helpful in my life as a philanthropist and a volunteer and in community organizations. And conversely, my volunteering has contributed in many ways to my success in business. So I think the two really feed off of each other, and I think there's probably a lesson there for a lot of people. And after all, we are the sum of all of our experiences, and I would never attribute any of my business success just to decisions we made in the business. It's been really a totality of everything I've been involved in over the last 30 years or so. And any sense of fulfillment that I experience comes not from reaching a particular goal, but more from the journey of getting there. And the journey continues to this day. And I never really chose to be, people think as a business person, you're a taker, you're making money and taking from, and I never really chose to be a giver or a taker consciously. But I did consciously pursue a path which allowed me to do both at the same time. Early in my career, I had no material wealth. In fact, I had mostly debt. And as such, and I'm now talking about the charitable sector, I could only really give of my time. I couldn't give money. I didn't have any money. But as time went on, I became very proficient at raising money from other people. So I was giving of my time in a leadership position, and I was helping to raise large sums of money. And then later, of course, as my business success continued, I'm now in a better position to actually give money in addition to raising money and giving of my time. And an important foundation block in all this, of course, has been my business life. When I began the business in 1987, as I mentioned, we had 8 employees, and my main concern was survival. I was 29. People said, "You're too young, you have no money, you've never owned a business, you've never run a business, you've never even been an insurance broker, you are doomed to fail, you won't last 6 months." And 20 years later, we had built the largest firm in Canada. There are 3,000 such firms in Canada. We were number 1. And so I now look back at some of those people. Some of them work for me, actually. And but you know, that was the early stage, survival, just paying our employees and keeping the lights turned on. And since then, of course, we built the business and we concentrate on growing and figure out who our competition is and how do we compete effectively with them. And I don't have time to talk about a lot of this, because I have 2 minutes. But along this journey, one of the lessons I've learned is that, particularly at the outset, had we listened to others who spoke this language of limitation about us being too young or inexperienced, much more experienced, wiser, and knowledgeable people, we would have never taken the chances we did and made the sacrifices we did, and I wouldn't be standing here in front of you today. So certainly not speaking from this standpoint. So, and I always see people that, and I think this is the mark of an entrepreneur, that people, it's very easy to see the obstacles which are immediately in front of you and to fixate on them and to get caught up in them. It's much more difficult to see the goals and the long-term future that's way out in front of you. And I've always had this weakness, I suppose, in that I don't even listen. I don't even look at the obstacles. I ignore them. They're negative, and I don't want to hear about them. I'm interested in what's out there and what opportunity exists way out in the future, and that's always been the way I've governed my life. So my business, of course, deals in uncertainty. When bad things happen, insurance comes into play. And I don't need to tell you that we live in a time of unprecedented change and insecurity. Climate change, geopolitical instability, threats of war, both in the traditional sense and cyber warfare. Really an instability and a loss of confidence, which I see in our financial markets and our financial institutions, which is very disturbing. And all kinds of technological advances, all of which are changing our way of life and changing our traditional ways of thinking. And I suppose we can fear change or we can accept it, but the one thing we can't do is be complacent about it. And so we've seen all kinds of manufacturers and retailers and service companies disappear in the last 10 years because they haven't kept pace with the changing consumer behaviors and expectations. And this is really a challenge for every single business, and I face it every single day. The only thing just in closing, because I don't have time to go on, but speaking in the context of people coming out of universities these days, a lot of people in our generation, if I can include myself with the rest of you, describe our new generation, Gen Z and the millennials, as lacking in certain social skills because they conduct their lives on phones or tablets. And I actually tend to disagree with this because I think that their ability to make connections with people across the globe in real time and work together is unprecedented in our lifetimes. And it's a marvel to behold how young people actually are able to do that, things that we weren't able to do in our era. And the advent of big data-driven business models and technological advancements will continue to redefine how we operate and do business. But it's really in the context of all that happening that we need young people because they understand this much better than we do. So I'm actually very hopeful for the young people. And sure, they're different than we are. And for sure, they're different than we are. But I'm very hopeful that they'll find their way in the world just as I have and just as all of you have. So for me, it's been an incredible journey. Time does not permit me to share my entire story, but I'm pleased to have had the opportunity to share a few observations with you, and thank you very much.